It's not that God abandoned you. It's that you stepped into a night so sacred, so weighty, so divine, that even heaven went quiet. You're not forgotten. You're hidden. And if you're honest, you've felt it for a while now. The silence, the stillness, the sense that your prayers are echoing into a void. You look around and nothing makes sense anymore. You can't feel His presence like you used to. You open your Bible and it feels like ink on paper. You kneel to pray, but your words fall like stones instead of rising like incense. And somewhere deep inside you, a question begins to whisper, "Did God leave me?" But what if you're not being punished? What if you're being trusted? We've been taught that God's presence feels like fire, like joy, like answers, like movement. But no one told you that some of God's most sacred moments come wrapped in shadows. No one warned you that the God who parts seas also leads people through valleys where nothing parts and nothing moves. And now, here you are, waiting in a night that feels endless, staring into a silence that feels cruel. But this silence isn't empty. It's holy. There's something sacred about the nights where heaven doesn't explain itself, where the light is gone, but you keep walking, where everything in you wants to break down, but somehow you don't. You're not in the wrong place. You're in the set-apart place, the hidden hour, the sacred night. It's the night where God doesn't show Himself as fire, but as shadow. The night where you don't hear His voice, but you're still inside His will. It's the same kind of night Jacob wrestled through, the same kind of night Jesus wept through in Gethsemane, the same kind of night that wrapped the Israelites in Egypt while death swept through the land. And God passed by, unseen in the dark. And here you are, thinking it's over. But you don't realize you're still inside a divine moment, because sometimes when God trusts you the most, He hides the most. He doesn't disappear. He withdraws into the shadows, not to harm you, but to make you holy. And that holiness comes at a price: silence, confusion, pain, and that aching feeling that no one, not even heaven, is listening. But God isn't distant. He's watching. He's holding His breath. He's waiting to see, will you still believe when there's nothing left to feel? This is not a punishment. This is Passover, the real kind, the original kind, the kind where you wait in a room with the door shut tight, blood on the frame, fear in your chest, and a God who is doing something outside that you're not allowed to see. You're not abandoned. You're sealed. You're not stuck. You're preserved. And even though the room feels cold and still, something is moving beyond the walls. Something invisible, something irreversible, something holy. You've been lied to. The world tells you that God always shows up with fire, thunder, music, miracles. But sometimes He comes like a whisper you can't hear, like a shadow you can't trace, like a midnight so thick it makes you question everything you thought you knew. You think you're falling apart, but you're actually being prepared. Because in God's story, some of the most powerful transformations don't happen in the light. They happen in the night. Abraham walked into the darkness when God cut covenant with him. Moses met God in thick, terrifying cloud. Jesus rose while it was still dark. And now it's your turn. You're not in the wrong season. You're in the sacred season. The night before the breakthrough. The moment before the chains fall. The silence before the voice thunders. But it doesn't look like what you expected. You thought sacred would feel safe. You thought holy would feel peaceful. But sometimes the most sacred thing God can do is let you sit in the night long enough to discover that His presence doesn't depend on your feelings. You might think you're alone, but the fact that you're still breathing, still watching, still reaching, even when nothing makes sense, means God is closer than you know, because He would not allow this level of silence if He didn't know you were strong enough to carry it. And the truth is, you're not just surviving this night, you're being marked by it, marked for something that can't be taught in the daylight, marked for a kind of trust that can't be developed in noise, marked for something eternal. This isn't just a dark season, it's a sacred one. It's the place between bondage and freedom, between breakdown and becoming. And it hurts, yes, it confuses, it breaks your routine, your expectations, your image of what God should be doing by now. But maybe that's the point, because you don't meet the real God in your comfort. You meet him in the contradiction, in the place where nothing adds up, but you refuse to stop believing, in the hour where your hands are empty, but you still lift them, in the room where it's just you and silence, and yet somehow that silence is sacred, and that's why you're still standing. Not because the pain isn't real, not because you're strong, but because something in you refuses to call this night a grave. Deep down, you know it's not the end. It's a passage, a crossing, a mysterious, sacred unfolding that the enemy wants you to give up on. But you won't. You can't. Because somewhere, hidden in this darkness, is the God who never left. And he's still moving. You've probably read the story of the Exodus dozens of times. You've heard about the plagues, the hardened heart of Pharaoh, the parting of the Red Sea. But there's one part that most people skip past, because it doesn't sound like victory, it doesn't feel like a miracle. It's the part that happens in the dark, quiet, still, ominous. It's Exodus 12, the night no one talks about, the night when God passed over Egypt, but before the sea split, before the freedom songs, before the chains fell to the ground, something happened behind closed doors. A nation of people, broken, exhausted, bleeding from years of slavery, were told to do something that seemed strange. Take a lamb, slaughter it, smear its blood over the doorframe, and then wait. No marching, no shouting, no signs and wonders, just obedience, in silence in the dark. They weren't told how long the night would last. They weren't told what it would feel like. They weren't given details, timelines, or comfort. They were told to trust, not just God's power, but his process. They had to believe that something holy was happening outside, while nothing made sense inside. And that's where many of us live today, inside the house. In the dark, with a promise written in blood over the door, and a storm we can't see moving through the world. What most people don't realize is that Exodus 12 wasn't just a moment in history. It was a blueprint, a spiritual pattern, a sacred mystery that still plays out in the lives of those God calls to himself. Because God didn't just rescue Israel with power, he taught them how to wait in the dark, and maybe that's exactly what he's doing with you. You've felt it, that tension between obedience and uncertainty, that weight of wondering why God gave you instructions but no updates. You know he told you to stay, you know he marked you, but now you sit in silence, watching others seem free while you feel stuck. You want to move, but God said stay. You want to fight, but God said rest. You want answers, but all you have is blood on the frame and a promise in your chest. And the truth is, that's not weakness, that's faith. Faith is not proven in what you do after the sea splits. It's proven in what you do before. When you hear screams in the distance and the air feels heavy and the only thing holding you together is the memory of what God said. Imagine what it must have felt like inside those homes. The sound of mourning echoing from the houses of the Egyptians. The unknown pressing against the walls. Mothers holding their children, fathers gripping the doorway, eyes locked on the red-stained wood, hoping it was enough. Hearts racing with the question no one dared to ask out loud. Is God really going to pass over us? And yet, he did. Not because they were strong, not because they were perfect, but because they obeyed, because they stayed in the house. That's what this season requires from you. Not control, not clarity, but obedience. Stay where God told you to stay, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you feel forgotten, even if you can't trace what he's doing. Stay. There's a storm moving through the land, and your survival doesn't depend on how loud your faith is. It depends on whether your door is marked and whether you're inside. Because what passed through Egypt that night wasn't just death. It was judgment, a divine reset, a confrontation between a holy God and a corrupt system. And in the middle of that war, Israel was tucked away in silence, not because they were ignored, but because they were being preserved. That's the kind of God He is. He doesn't always pull you out of the chaos. Sometimes He teaches you how to wait through it. He teaches you how to survive the night, not by escaping it, but by trusting that He's working while you're still, that His power isn't always loud. Sometimes it moves like a whisper through the streets, unseen, unstoppable, unmistakable. And just like that night in Egypt, He still comes to deliver, but not always the way we expect. Sometimes deliverance looks like movement. Other times it looks like stillness. Sometimes God parts a sea. Other times He closes a door. And both are miracles. So if you feel like nothing's happening right now, don't believe the lie. Something is always happening when you obey God. Something shifts in the spirit even when you don't see it in the natural. That blood you placed over the threshold of your life, it's not just symbolic. It speaks, it covers, it still holds power. The question is, will you trust it even when the night gets darker? Because here's the secret they don't tell you. The closer the morning comes, the louder the night gets. The enemy knows what's about to happen. The storm gets violent before it ends. And if you're hearing more chaos lately, more confusion, more noise, more spiritual static, it's because deliverance is closer than you think. But don't miss it trying to open the door too soon. What if Israel had stepped outside the house in panic? What if someone had said, "I don't feel God here. I'm going to look for Him out there"? What if they abandoned the stillness for activity, the promise for action, the obedience for anxiety? They would have stepped out of the covering and into destruction. That's what the enemy wants you to do, to convince you that silence means absence, that darkness means danger, that God's delay means denial. But every part of this night is on purpose. Every minute has been measured. Every breath has been counted. You are not surviving by chance. You are being kept by design. Because what's coming next isn't random. It's redemption. And just like it did in Egypt, it will happen while the world sleeps, while you sit in the stillness, while heaven moves in shadows. And when it's over, you'll realize this wasn't just a night of survival. It was the night heaven passed by your door. Perguntar ao ChatGPT, somewhere along the way, we were taught that God always speaks in volume, that His presence must come with thunder, fire, miracles, or voices from the heavens, that when He moves, it will shake the ground and silence our doubts. And yet, for many of us, the most life-changing seasons are the ones where God says nothing at all. No signs, no visions, no confirmations, just silence that stretches into the night and feels almost unbearable. But what if the silence isn't a punishment? What if it's a veil? A holy curtain pulled across the stage, not to conceal something from you, but to prepare something for you. Because in the history of God's dealings with His people, the most sacred things never arrived with noise. They came after the silence. They came in the stillness, in the quiet, in the moments where every natural sense had to surrender. And that's what makes this night sacred. You're not being ignored. You're being invited to a dimension of faith where feelings don't reach, where logic doesn't help, and where trust becomes the only way forward. This is the threshold where God doesn't speak like a king on a throne, but walks like a father through a shadow. It's not about what you hear, it's about what you hold on to. Do you remember Elijah? The prophet who called fire down from heaven now finds himself hiding in a cave, broken, exhausted, ready to die. He's expecting God to show up like He did before, with thunder, wind, earthquake, flame. But instead, God sends all those elements and then ignores them. And then comes a still, small voice, a whisper. That was the real presence. Not the dramatic, not the obvious, but the intimate. So close that you wouldn't hear it unless you stopped moving, unless you silenced the noise inside you, unless you had nothing left but the desire to hear. And that's where many of us are right now, stripped down to nothing, no distractions left, no performance, no external strength, just you and silence. And God somewhere in that silence, waiting to be recognized, not by your ears, but by your spirit. Because that's what the sacred night does. It detaches you from what's loud and introduces you to what's lasting. And the silence becomes the sanctuary. You start to realize that not all absence is abandonment, that just because God isn't speaking doesn't mean he's not present. In fact, his greatest acts often begin with silence. Before the world was formed, silence. Before Jesus spoke in the tomb, silence. Before the curtain tore, silence. Before the stone rolled away, deep, heavy, unshakable silence. And then, suddenly, everything changes. That's how God moves in sacred nights. Not always with spectacle, but with transformation. You may not see it now, but the silence is forming something in you that nothing else could. A deeper kind of trust, a quieter kind of strength, a faith that is no longer built on what God does for you, but on who he is to you. Because anyone can praise God when the answers come, but only a few can love him when the silence stays. And it's in those moments, when you worship with no music, pray with no feeling, believe with no evidence, that heaven takes notice, that God leans in, that the darkness becomes not just a space of sorrow, but a space of communion, a private chamber where the world cannot follow and the noise of life cannot penetrate. And what if that's what this night is really about? Not delay, not abandonment, but intimacy. Not God pulling away, but God drawing near in a way you've never experienced. Not to show his power, but to share his heart. Because the truth is, God doesn't always want to impress you. Sometimes he wants to form you, to shape your heart into something that can carry more than miracles, something that can carry revelation. And revelation doesn't come in the chaos, it comes in the quiet. Maybe that's why you're still here. Because God knew that if he stripped away every distraction, every feeling, every confirmation, you would still reach for him. You would still listen, you would still wait. And that kind of waiting is not weakness, it's worship. You're not just enduring the silence. You're ministering to the one who dwells inside it. The God who hides himself not to distance you, but to draw you deeper. The God who passes by in the night not to scare you, but to see if your faith still burns when the fire disappears. The God who seals you inside a sacred moment so that when he finally speaks, you will never mistake his voice again, because the longer the silence, the more unmistakable his whisper will be. And when it comes, it won't just bring answers. It will bring identity, purpose, power, not the kind that makes you loud, but the kind that makes you anchored. And when the world trembles again, when others run in panic, you will stand. Not because you heard more, but because you waited longer and you trusted deeper. You think this is just a hard season, just a dry phase, just life happening. But what if what you're walking through isn't just a difficult moment? It's a sacred appointment. What if this pain isn't random? What if the silence, the stillness, the isolation, the confusion, what if none of it is a mistake, but the exact atmosphere where God does his most holy work? You've been praying for breakthrough, and instead you've found yourself in a space where everything feels like it's been stripped away. Your confidence, your clarity, your comfort. You walk into rooms and feel invisible. You try to explain what you're going through, and people just nod awkwardly as if they're hearing a language they don't understand. Even your prayers feel quieter now, as if your own spirit is hesitant to speak too loud. You're not just tired, you're being emptied, and that's what makes this moment sacred. Because in the eyes of heaven, sacred doesn't always mean beautiful. Sometimes it means broken, sometimes it means buried. Sometimes it means hidden in a place where no one claps, no one watches, and no one even knows what God is doing, except God. You see, there's a kind of suffering that comes from life, but then there's a different kind, a deeper kind, the kind that feels appointed, the kind where you can almost sense that heaven's hand is involved, even if you can't explain it, the kind that strips you of control not to punish you, but to position you. That's not abandonment, that's sacred disorientation. We find this pattern throughout the Bible. Joseph had dreams of glory, of rulership, of purpose, and then found himself in a pit, then a prison. But none of it was wasted. None of it was outside God's control. It was all part of a sacred route, not a detour, the design. He didn't know it at the time, but the betrayal, the false accusations, the forgotten years, those were the building blocks of a divine setup, a holy night before the morning of purpose. And maybe that's you. Maybe you're in the part of the story that no one preaches about, the part where there are no visible miracles, no answered prayers, no angelic visitations, just obedience in the dark. Just showing up when everything in you wants to shut down. Just whispering, "God, I trust you," when everything in your life seems to say He's not even there. But God is not absent. He's working under the surface. What if your stillness is the soil where your next season is being planted? What if what feels like loss is actually a spiritual incubation? The womb of a new beginning that hasn't taken shape yet, but already has heaven's fingerprint on it. Think about how God operates. He hides things before He reveals them. He conceals before He crowns. David was anointed in secret before he was recognized in public. Jesus was baptized in silence before He preached to crowds. And before the resurrection, there was the tomb, sealed, silent, dark, but holy. That's how God forms real power, not in the noise, but in the nothingness. And maybe that's what you're experiencing right now. Not failure, not absence, but formation. God is not trying to make you busy. He's trying to make you ready. Ready for what? For more than you can handle right now. For assignments that require a deeper root system. For clarity that doesn't fade when pressure comes. For spiritual authority that's not based on performance, but on the kind of intimacy only born in the wilderness. And here's the thing about wilderness seasons. No one claps for them. There are no awards for waiting well, no applause for trusting when it hurts, no spotlight when you choose not to run, not to numb yourself, not to escape. But heaven sees it. And heaven doesn't measure growth the way earth does. Heaven doesn't look for surface results. It looks for depth, for surrender, for faith that's forged in fire and doesn't need to be seen to be real. That's what this night is about. It's not about proving yourself to the world. It's about becoming someone the world can't shake. Because when this night is over, and yes, it will end, you won't be the same. You won't come out weaker, you'll come out marked. The kind of mark no one else can see, but the spiritual realm immediately recognizes. The kind of authority that doesn't come from books or titles or platforms, but from surviving the silence and not losing your worship, from staying in the hidden place and not losing your hope. The mark of someone who has been with God in the night. That's what separates surface believers from deep ones. That's what defines spiritual maturity, not charisma, not eloquence, not appearance, but the ability to walk through what feels like death and still declare life. So if you've been wondering why this season feels so dark, so stripped, so lonely, maybe it's not because something is wrong with you. Maybe it's because something holy is happening to you. Maybe you're in a room that heaven hasn't unlocked yet, but the lights are already on behind the door. Maybe this is the part of the story where everything is still quiet, but the curtain is about to rise, and you're not late. You're not forgotten. You're not off course. You're standing on sacred ground, even if you can't feel it yet. Morning doesn't begin with sunlight, it begins in the dark. Before the birds sing, before the sky fades from black to blue, before any sign of change is visible, the new day has already started. You just can't see it yet, and that's exactly how God works. His timing doesn't wait for your feelings to align or for circumstances to improve. The shift begins while it's still dark, while everything looks the same, while your soul still aches and your mind is still searching for closure. Your deliverance is already in motion long before your senses can catch up. The Bible says in Psalm 35, "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." But most people rush to the second part of the verse, hungry for the joy, desperate for the light, skipping over the word that holds the key to everything. Endure. That night you're living through, it doesn't just pass. It tests, it presses, it forms. And for those who endure it, something eternal is forged that can never be taken away. You're not just waiting for morning. You're being prepared to recognize it, because joy doesn't come to the ones who escaped the night. It comes to the ones who stayed faithful through it, who didn't trade in their worship for bitterness, who didn't walk away from the door marked in obedience, who didn't abandon the silence before the shout. It's easy to believe once the sun rises, but heaven is watching for who believes before the shift, before the answer, before the breakthrough, when the pain is still real and your faith doesn't have evidence yet, when you're still crying, but somehow you lift your hands anyway, when nothing in you feels strong, but you show up for God not with force, but with surrender. That's where the real power begins. That's where the true morning starts. And the truth is, the morning doesn't arrive suddenly. It reveals itself slowly, one moment at a time. The birds don't wait for full light to sing. They start their chorus when the shadows still linger. And maybe that's your invitation, not to wait for everything to feel right before you worship, but to start singing into the dark, to thank God while you still feel numb, to trust Him while the pain hasn't passed yet. Because that sound, that act of faith, is what separates you from those who just want relief. It's the sound of someone who wants God more than an answer. And that kind of faith doesn't go unnoticed. It's the kind of faith that God breathes on, the kind of worship that shakes prison doors like Paul and Silas, the kind of belief that makes angels stand still and listen. Because heaven doesn't measure your faith by how loud you shout when the walls fall. It measures your faith by how long you keep walking around them in silence, believing they still will. This is what makes your night sacred. Not the suffering, but the song. Not the silence, but the yes you keep whispering in the middle of it. You don't need a spotlight to please God. You don't need to feel goosebumps or hear thunder or see immediate change. You just need to endure, to hold on when it would be easier to let go. To believe that the same God who spoke the stars into existence hasn't forgotten the coordinates of your life. He knows exactly where you are. He knows exactly what He's doing, and He knows exactly when your morning began, even if you're still sitting in the dark. Because God's timing is not measured by clocks or calendars. It's measured by readiness. And maybe this whole season has been about getting you ready to carry the next assignment, ready to recognize His voice in a deeper way, ready to walk with Him not out of emotion, but out of intimacy. You see, some people need fireworks to believe God is near, but you're learning to find Him in the stillness, in the shadows, in the slow unfolding of a new beginning that doesn't announce itself with applause, but with quiet clarity, with a peace that makes no sense, with strength that surprises even you. And here's what you'll find. When the light does come, you're not the same. You don't need what you thought you needed. You're not craving validation. You're not chasing explanations. You're grounded, settled, secure, not because everything's perfect, but because God is enough. And now you finally know it. That's what the night was for, to strip you down to nothing but Him, and to show you that nothing else compares. The morning isn't coming because you earned it. It's coming because God promised it, because you endured, because you didn't give up when the night tried to convince you that it would last forever. You stayed, you trusted, you believed, and now joy is not just coming, it's already here. You just didn't recognize it at first because it looked like peace in a silent room. It looked like breath in your lungs when you thought you were finished. It looked like tears that didn't crush you, but cleansed you. It looked like you, still standing, still believing after everything. And that is holy.